Welcome to Direction Northeast. Hello, I'm Andy Jackson. This program is a presentation of the Mass Communications Department of Northeast State Community College. Turn on a TV, go to a movie, walk down the street, and you know what you'll see? Zombies. Everywhere you look, you see zombies. Direction Northeast comes live with haunting information about the undead right after this.
Business, medical, and financial institutions must have confidence in the data that they use. Information assurance is the strategic use of technology and software to protect data from internal and external threats. Northeast State offers an associate's degree program designed to fill the demand for information assurance professionals. The Information Assurance program offers hands-on personal instruction. Northeast State Community College is an accredited institution offering financial aid and job placement. Northeast State, we're here to get you there.
From The Walking Dead to Night of the Living Dead, if you want to be in today, zombies are where it's at. This program is about zombies with a man who wrote the book and taught the class on all things zombies. His course at Columbia College in Chicago is called Zombies in Popular Media. Welcome to Associate Professor of English, Brendan Riley. Hello, Mr. Riley, how are you?
Good.
Good. Why are zombies so popular in mass media right now?
Well, it's a medium that's stayed popular since 1968 when George Romero created it, but I would say in the last 10 years or so we've seen a significant increase in popularity. I think because everybody can relate to zombies. We've all had hard times, and zombies are having a hard time themselves, and so I think we can empathize with the experience that they're having, on some level anyway.
Okay. And why do zombies fascinate us as a culture?
Well, I think there are a lot of things about them that work really well. They encourage us to think about what we would do in survival situations. So when we see a zombie movie, we think, how would we handle that? Where would we hide? What weapons would we use? We also like to think about how society works. And so when a zombie outbreak happens, society crumbles, and we want to think about it. It's interesting to think about what will it be like when society crumbles. I think also at some level we're all concerned with death, and zombies are death embodied. So we can't help but wonder what's going on when we see a walking corpse.
It's that morbid fascination kind of.
Exactly.
From a literary point of view, what do you feel zombies are a metaphor for?
Well, depending on the text, zombies are a very flexible metaphor. I think at their core, the zombie is a figure that makes us afraid of being out of control. That a lot of zombie movies, zombie texts, zombie stories, comics have this idea that we don't want to be a zombie. Even though we pretend that's not the person it was, we're still afraid of being stuck in that body, like in John Malkovich, or in Being John Malkovich, where the person's inside has no control of what's going on. So I think we're afraid of being out of control. But it's a flexible metaphor, so they're used for all sorts of social commentary.
Okay. What cultural forces shape the way we see and understand these creatures?
Well, with each different iteration of the genre, and it's like I said, it's been around, the Hollywood zombie, the Romero one, the one you think of now, that's been around since the late 60s. So with each iteration, each time it comes up again, we find new ways to make it relevant. So in the 70s, when Romero makes Dawn of the Dead, it's about consumerism.
Right.
In the 80s, it's about the military. Today, I think it's about the fast pace of society. I think there's a reason zombies have started running, and it's because everything is moving really fast, and we feel out of control.
Right, and there's a different, when you talk about zombies running, you're obviously talking about 28 Days Later, as opposed to like The Walking Dead or something like that. So, is it more frightening that zombies run? It's a culture, or?
Well, certainly for me, I've seen so many zombie movies that slow zombies films aren't frightening anymore for me. But I would say since 28 Days Later and the remake of Dawn of the Dead, which was 2004, the bulk of zombie movies that are made are fast zombies. The slow zombies are definitely in the minority now. Some people have suggested that once Shaun of the Dead came out, which is a very funny slow zombie movie, that it was very hard to make a scary slow zombie movie. Walking Dead is probably the exception that proves the rule there, that it is frightening, but I don't think it's as scary as some of the fast ones because it doesn't get your heart pounding in the same way.
Right. And now you're a member of the Zombie Research Society Advisory Board. Can you tell us about that?
Sure. The Zombie Research Society is a loose coalition of experts from a variety of fields. I'm a cultural studies scholar and pop culture scholar, but there are medical people, there are biologists and epidemiologists, people who study the question of a zombie from all sorts of perspectives. And they're really interested in thinking through the idea, some more seriously than others, but the biologists and epidemiologists that I know from that group make me very frightened about the possibility of a 28 Days Later type virus.
Exactly. I mean, I think that would be more frightening, faster zombies as opposed to slower zombies, just because it would be more of a survival technique, right?
And the thing is that a lot of our cultural knowledge about how one should react to a zombie outbreak is built on the idea that the zombies are slow.
Right.
You know, zombies being fast is a whole different story. You probably don't have time to barricade your door.
Right.
They're on it right after you get it closed.
Exactly. For viewers who might not know, how do you actually define or classify a zombie?
Well, there are lots of different types, so it depends on what text you're reading. Most people, when they say zombie, they're thinking of a walking corpse that wants to eat living people. That's the standard Romero zombie. Sometimes it'll want brains, although that's actually a small subset of zombie movies. A number of different stories have promoted different ideas of zombies. Originally, zombies were a voodoo creature that was raised from the dead and controlled by a magician. And up until 1968, when you said zombie, that's what people thought of. Now, a third kind that I'm really interested in are what we call philosophical zombies, which is sort of a mind experiment in which we imagine a being that has no internal ideas, but seems to be a person. If you think of Invasion of the Body Snatchers as an example of those kind of zombies.
Okay. And I actually saw your speech when you were talking about voodoo zombies, and then you're talking about Romero zombies that you keep talking about. And then you said there was a philosophical zombie.
Mm-hmm.
Can you besides the voodoo and the Romero, can you talk a little bit about the philosophical one?
Sure. So the philosophical zombie was first proposed as a thought experiment by philosophers who wanted to try to understand the mind-body problem, which is the question of where our body stops and our personhood begins. You know, most of us have religious ideas about what that means. So if you have the idea of a soul, that's probably where you imagine your personhood is. But as far as science is concerned, our brain is where we are.
Right.
And so when you start thinking about what it means to be a person, and you start asking real-world questions like, are we a different person if we, say, start losing our mind through senility or insanity, then it really starts to be a question of how do we understand who we are and where humanity is.
What did you refer to when you recently wrote on people, zombies, and the fuzzy line between them?
Well, I think that a lot of zombie films are encouraging us to understand or think about where we draw that line. When we talk about the mind-body problem, this idea that we stop being a person when we die, and so then it's okay to kill zombies. But a lot of zombie films are starting to be more empathetic with the question of the zombie. Romero has built that into all of his movies. You know, even Night of the Living Dead, some of the later scenes, it's hard not to feel sorry for the zombies. But the later movies, Dawn of the Dead and Day of the Dead, the zombies start to be really empathetic figures. And so we start to wonder if there's any kind of personhood left in the zombie, if there's any kind of memory, then suddenly it's not ethically okay to kill them all on sight. You know, there becomes an issue of you need to think about what that person is or was.
Right.
And I think, you know, like we mentioned before, when people change, when do we decide that that's not the same person? Right. And you know, the real life situations of people, like say people in elder care facilities who are losing their memory, we love them because they are certainly still the people we love, but we don't recognize them as still being the same person we used to know. That if they act differently, we'll say that, well, that's the disease. Right. But yeah, so I think there are lots of, the line is fuzzier than we like to.
In your speech that I saw, you were talking about people as opposed to zombies, that there's still a little bit of the person inside the brain, and that they actually see what they're doing, but they can't control it. Is that pretty much the same thing that you're talking about, or how would you explain that?
Well, I think that there are a couple different versions of that. Certainly there are people who lose control of their body, who start to have problems there, and there we're seeing a separation of the mind and body. I think more problematic or questionable is somebody who's in, say, what they call persistent vegetative state, which is, as far as we can tell, there's nothing going on in their brain, that they are brain dead. But it's a kind of brain dead that's not a coma, but rather their eyes are open, their body moves around. I mean, this was a really famous case a couple years ago. The Congress got interested in a woman named Terry Chavo who had been in a car accident, and she was in this state for about 10 years. If you saw a video of her, it looked like she's awake, she's moving, her hands are moving, but as far as we can tell from the brain scan, there's nothing going on inside. And so there was a real debate over whether it's ethical or should be legal to, say, remove the feeding tube from her, and she will starve to death because she can't feed herself.
I remember that was a very famous case, and a lot of controversy about that as well. So I understand that for sure. There appears to be a historical basis for belief in zombies. Could you tell us about that? Most notably, like Lost Colony of Roanoke.
Certainly. So there's sort of two parts there. I'll start with the part that's easier for me to answer.
Okay.
Voodoo zombies, like I said, is where the idea of the zombie came into popular culture. That in Haiti, there's this idea of a person who could be raised from the dead by a magician and then would have to serve as a slave to the magician. And a number of different people who went to Haiti throughout the 20th century had written about these figures as if they really saw them. And these weren't fictional stories, these are nonfiction accounts. Famously, William Seabrook wrote this book, The Magic Island, in 1928, which has a lot of problems from a modern readership perspective, but introduces this figure. And so a number of scientists and other people have explored this question, have said, how could this really be? And so the two things to think about as a possibility for a real thing are, one, the voodoo religion is built on the idea of possession. Possession is something they see as happening often in their rituals. People become possessed, not too dissimilarly from, say, people who speak in tongues at evangelical churches. It's a similar kind of experience. So if you combine that with a drug that could knock you out for a day, it wouldn't, and make you appear to be dead. It's not inconceivable to think that someone raised in that religion who was maybe brain damaged from being buried might be dug up after having been dosed with this drug and could think themselves to be a zombie. If you're sort of approaching it from a scientific rationalist perspective, that would be the explanation. The popular book that explains that really well is a book called Serpent and the Rainbow by Wade Davis. The movie is terrible. You don't want to see that. It's not at all like the book. But the book is interesting. It's a little hokey because he writes sort of like he describes himself in a way that makes him seem like Indiana Jones. So it's kind of hard to take him seriously. But he's a Harvard botanist and anthropologist, so he's got the credentials to be able to make the case he's making. In terms of Roanoke or other sort of older developments before the word zombie was being used, the figures of the dead sort of coming back to life or have been part of popular mythology for a long time. In Europe, they called them revenants. Other parts of the world, they use other terms for corpses that come back. Ghoul is something that eats corpses. So there's these ideas circulating that feed off one another. The Roanoke thing particularly, the first place I saw it was in one of the Max Brooks books. He's the popular writer who wrote World War Z and the Zombie Survival Guide. And he has a number of historical incidents from the past that he says might have been zombie outbreaks. And I think Roanoke is one of those suggestions.
Yeah, I've read that book, actually, The Survival Guide, Max Brooks wrote. He was talking about ghouls and stuff like that. And it's funny because he has like storylines almost about, well, in this situation it was that, and he chalked it up to ghouls, which I thought was pretty interesting. What is the link between The Walking Dead and cannibalism?
Well, to be precise, zombies are not cannibals because cannibals eat their own kind, and zombies don't generally eat other zombies. Now, my answer whenever somebody asks about anything about how do you define zombies, which isn't what you asked, but I get it often enough, is it depends on the text you're reading. There are certainly, I've noticed a couple graphic novels and novels where zombies are eating to get a sort of life force, and other zombies have a little life force. So when desperate, a strong zombie will eat a weak one. But most stories don't make zombies into cannibals. You know, I think that the link between zombieism and cannibalism comes from this root in the Caribbean. That if the figure of the zombie is rooted in, it springs out of the voodoo zombie figure, this walking corpse. But also deeply rooted in the mythology of the Caribbean that we think of is this idea of cannibalism, is the idea of people who eat other people. I mean, most recently in I think the second of the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, there's cannibals in that movie. And it's a pretty regular idea that in the South Seas of the Pacific and in the Caribbean, there are cannibals and you have to watch out for them. So I think my take is that the cannibalism sort of comes along with the zombie when it moves from the Caribbean to Middle America.
Okay. What about zombies fascinated you and caused you to study them? I mean, what was it that really got you going?
Well, like most popular culture scholars, my deep interest in whatever I'm studying roots from being a fan of it. So when I was a high schooler, I was a big film buff. I used to do these trilogies with my friends. We'd watch all 3 movies of some group. And so one time we did the Living Dead trilogy, Night, Dawn, and Day. At the time, Land and all the other ones hadn't been made yet. And so we watched those 3, and I was fascinated. At that point, I was a zombie fan, full stop. And so fast forward to being a professor, my school introduced something called a January term, which is like a 3-week period between fall and spring semesters, during which people take a class that is offered at that time and no other time. And so I used an experience I had had as an undergrad to take a very intensive course to create this course about zombies. So when students take my course, it's 3 hours of class session plus a 2 to 3 hour screening each day, plus homework. And we meet 5 days a week for 3 weeks. So by the end, they've done a semester's worth of reading, writing, and watching in 3 weeks.
And you were talking about total submersion, right? Just always zombies.
Right, and I think of this method as the crucible method. A crucible is a oven that you use to fire pottery. So you make a pot and you want to make it hard. You put it in this really intense oven that makes it solidify. And my experience teaching the class is that when we watch 17 zombie movies over 14 class meetings. So when you watch those 17 movies within 3 weeks of each other, you see connections and themes flowing through the text that you wouldn't see if you watch them over the semester. Right. Now there's downsides. One of the big downsides is that people get exhausted. By the beginning of the 3rd week, people are tired. The final project that I have people do in the class is a kind of creative project, and I have, in the last couple of years, made that part of spring semester. So they do the coursework and the reading during the J term, and then they have 2 months to do the creative project after the class is over. Because people had these great ideas, and then they had no time to do them. So I get much better projects this way.
And when you talk about 17 movies, what are the movies that you pick?
Well, I use a variety. The 3 kinds of zombies I've talked about: the voodoo zombie, the philosophical zombie, and the Hollywood zombie. We watch movies from all 3 of those. The voodoo zombie, probably the big ones are White Zombie and I Walked with a Zombie. The latter one is from the 40s. It's sort of great classic monster movie from Val Lewton, who's a really well-known, he made like Island of the Cat People, I think it was called. All these sort of great monster films. But the voodoo zombie really drops off after the 60s. For the Hollywood zombie, we watch a couple of the Romero movies. I think the 2 that people really like the most are the Lucio Fulci Zombie 2, which was called Zombie 2 because it was released in 1979, and he wanted people to think it was the sequel to Dawn of the Dead, which was called Zombie when it released in Italy. So he called his movie Zombie 2, so people would go see it. And that one, that's a classic example of the Italian splatter horror subgenre. Yeah. So the zombies move very slow. They're extremely gory. That's a movie not for the squeamish. And then I also really like to show them some more recent zombie movies. So we watch like the Spanish movie Record is really great. That's the movie that inspired Quarantine, which was, it's all shot through like you see the cameraman's perspective. He's on a TV crew. And then I'd say the last one I'll mention is Pontypool, which is a sort of really modern zombie movie. It's very strange, but the zombie virus spreads through language. So people are talking, and in talking, they spread the virus from one to another. And then they lose their ability to speak, and that's what drives them mad.
That's interesting. I haven't seen that one. I'll have to check that one out. Your writings focus on post-apocalyptic survival. How does that approach differ from survivalist literature?
Well, there's a big overlap in survivalist literature. I have a couple friends who are zombie novelists who do a lot of speaking engagements, and I've done some, where you get a significant number of questions along the lines of, what's the best way to build your zombie hideout? What weapons are best for killing zombies? And as you've seen from our conversation here, my first answer is always, well, it depends on which zombie story you're talking about. But there's a significant subset of zombie fandom that are interested in this question from the survival perspective. They are really keen to think about how would they survive the zombie apocalypse. And from one perspective, that's a strange choice. But from another perspective, it's also very smart, because if you're prepared for the zombie apocalypse, you're prepared for anything. If we have an oil shock, if we have an accidental nuclear discharge, if we have some sort of massive uprising, whatever. If you're prepared for the zombie apocalypse, you've got food and water, you've got a plan for how to keep your family safe, all of the things that you need to protect yourself and to make sure that you and your family get through okay, you're ready for. you probably don't need to think a lot about how you're going to kill people, but generally when you encounter the people who are really interested in the survivalist part, the killing zombies is not the central focus, at least after the initial pleasure of thinking about, well, I'd use a machete. And, once they've sort of thought that through, then it's more about how, where would we go, how would we survive?
Right. And obviously there in the Max Brooks books, he talks about zombies decaying over time.
Mm-hmm.
You're a big fan of The Walking Dead, obviously. Do you hate that they skipped winter altogether? Because wouldn't that, it would almost kind of defeat the show, wouldn't it?
Well, I mean, the way Max Brooks sets it up, the zombies survive the winter. If they freeze, then when they unfreeze, they start moving again. So and I don't know if that's solidly defined in the Zombie Survival Guide, but his novel, World War Z, which he wrote, I think he was researching that when he wrote Zombie Survival Guide. Like, Zombie Survival Guide was a self-research tool.
Yeah.
In World War Z, they quite solidly established that a zombie that's frozen will then come back to life after the freeze. So in one way, being in the north helps because half the time you're away from the frozen times. On the other hand, it takes a lot longer to clear zombies out because if you go through a place in the winter, you have to come back in the spring and see if any have thawed and come out of hiding.
Yeah. But they're a decaying body all the time. So eventually survivalists would get out of that, right? I mean, they're going to obviously decay and go away, and then it's going to go back to normal, or
right? You would think so. The timeline Max Brooks offers is 10 years.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's hard when you're suggesting some sort of virus that keeps dead flesh alive to suggest how long the dead flesh would continue to work. There's some really great stories. There's a great story, I think the author is Brian Keene, called The Wind Sings Merry, about basically a guy who has become a zombie who is watching another zombie because he is no longer mobile. And so one of the things we think about when we think about zombies and we're afraid of what's going on in their head is what would happen when you couldn't move anymore? Like, how long does your consciousness stay in the brain if it continues to survive after, say, the body falls apart? Would you end up just being a head laying in a field looking at the sky? That's sort of a terrifying idea.
Scary concept for sure. What are some of the myths surrounding zombies? And I know you're going to love this one. Why do they eat brains?
Well, sure. There are lots of different takes on what the zombie apocalypse would be. I think the most common idea right now is that it would be a virus. So you see a lot of films now where if you die from a gunshot wound, you don't reanimate. There are other stories, of course, where there's a mysterious reason. The Walking Dead, they don't really explain why people are zombies. Or the Night of the Living Dead offers an idea, but they never really explain it. Later stories offer a number of different things. A great one is Severed Forest of the Dead, in which bioengineered tree sap is what will cause you to become a zombie. That's a sort of environmentalist parable, obviously. Or there's comets from outer space. There's all sorts of things that would make someone be a zombie. In terms of eating the brains, that's a number of modern texts, recent texts, have grabbed that idea and gone with it for a number of different reasons. Like if you're going from a sort of idea of intelligence or life force, the brain would probably be the center of life. So there's a kind of argument to be made that the brain would be the best part if there's a life force being stolen. In terms of meat, the brain's probably not the best meat to eat. The brain-eating thing comes from a specific movie. When George Romero wrote Night of the Living Dead, he wrote it with a guy named John Russo, and they agreed that they both could use Of the Living Dead in any movie they made in future. So John Russo makes a movie in, I think, 1985 called Return of the Living Dead. And the premise of that movie is that Night of the Living Dead was real, and that the film made about it was sort of about a real event, and that there's this chemical that will reanimate the dead. And it's a sort of dark comedy, and this chemical gets into a graveyard, so all these zombies come out of the graveyard. That movie's really interesting for several reasons. One, it established the brains thing. Because two, it's one of the first movies I've seen where the zombies really are fast. In that movie, the zombies can run, they can talk. So you see a lot of zombies. The zombies will try to persuade people, let us in, I just want a little taste. And there's a great scene where the zombies capture an ambulance and kill the drivers of the ambulance. And then one of the zombies leans in and grabs the CB and goes into the microphone and says, "Send more cops." Right? So he's asking for more people. But that's the movie that establishes the brains thing. And there are several sequels that continue that. But that because it's so distinctive, these zombies going brains, people have really grabbed onto that, and it's become a common idea that zombies want to eat brains.
When you talk about Not a Living Dead, I'm sorry,
Return?
Return of, yeah. I'm sorry, The Walking Dead. I apologize,
Okay.
Walking Dead. We don't know the basis of why they're doing what they're doing, but isn't it weird? Like, this is the first time I've actually seen where somebody's been shot in the head and then they come back to life without being bitten. Is that the way that's going, or is it just going to be?
Well, like I said, there are a number of texts that deal with it in different ways. Like the original Night of the Living Dead, it was some sort of space radiation, and everyone who was dead reanimated. There's a great novel called Handling the Undead. It's a Swedish novel, and in that one, everyone who was dead within the last month of a certain day reanimates in Stockholm. It's just in Stockholm for some reason. That's the same writer who wrote Let the Right One In, which is a sort of popular vampire movie. So there are a number of different texts where they have everyone reanimate, and or the movie Fido is another example. In that one, when you die, you reanimate. So people are really concerned with having government-authorized funerals. Another great one, and this is for your viewers who like Japanese movies, there's a very strange zombie movie called Stacy, in which when teenage girls turn 17, they go through a very giddy phase, and then they become zombies. So there are squads that go around and kill the recently zombified 17-year-old girls. But it's very strange because all the zombies in the movie are schoolgirls in Japanese schoolgirl outfits. And it's sort of a play on zombie movies itself.
Okay. Real quick, what's your favorite thing about zombies?
My favorite thing about zombies, I think the duality between knowing that they're dead and being afraid of being in them. I think that's what captures me over and over with zombie movies, is this fear of being one, but also the fear of being eaten.
Yeah, I mean that's a pretty understandable fear for sure. Nobody wants that. And I know you said, real quick, for those who want to resist zombies, what survival tips would you give us? I know it's either slow or fast. Which one would you prefer, and how would you get rid of it?
Well, slow zombies would be a lot easier to resist, certainly. The main arguments, you have to have food and water. You have to prepare. And this is a good plan anyway, because there are lots of realistic events that you'd need this preparation for. So you should have a good emergency plan for your family. Keep a crowbar and a machete on hand. Both of those are very useful. If you know your guns, keeping guns on hand with a good stock of ammo is good. If you don't know guns, it's probably a bad idea because you're as likely to hurt someone you like.
So fast or slow, it's going to be preparation is key.
Preparation's key, because if you survive the initial outbreak, you will.
All right. Well, thank you. Well, thank you. We'll be back in just a moment to wrap up Direction Northeast.
What if there was a place?
Where your mind is nourished.
Your time respected.
A place where you don't feel lost in the crowd.
Where you get the attention you need.
And deserve.
What if that place is right here? Right here.
Right here, all along.
Over 80 programs of study.
A main campus.
And convenient teaching sites.
Unlimited potential.
Right in your backyard.
Northeast State.
Northeast State.
Northeast State Community College.
That concludes the program for today. We learned about the world of zombies with guest Columbia College Associate Professor of English, Brendan Riley. Community is very important to the students at Northeast State Community College, and this program takes a look at a few of the subjects they find important. Until we meet next time, on behalf of the students, staff, and faculty of Northeast State Community College, I'm Andy Jackson, and this is Direction Northeast.